Hello, and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we are going to be ranking the adaptations of The Hobbit. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the librarian, and today we are going to be ranking each of the adaptations of The Hobbit that I have been able to view or listen to or watch recently. Now I'm sure there are several adaptations of The Hobbit that I have missed, and I would love for you to drop down into the comments below and let me know which ones I've missed. But these are the ones that I've been able to kind of review recently, and some of these I've already done full reviews of on the channel, so you're welcome to go check those out as well. But I want to rank each of these and just kind of see how they stack up, which one is really the best adaptation of The Hobbit. Now, for those of you who've been following the channel for a while, you probably know that The Hobbit is my favorite of Tolkien's works. It was the first one I was ever introduced to, and I've loved it ever since. It really encapsulates for me the wonder and the magic of Tolkien's world. So over the last few months, I've gone through and reviewed most of these adaptations of The Hobbit to see which one I really thought was the best. So just so you know which ones we're looking at today, we're looking at the Rankin-Bass Hobbit, that's the cartoon from 1977. We're looking at the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, so there's 3 movies in that, but we're looking at them as one adaptation of the story. So those are the film adaptations. We also have a couple of game adaptations. One of them is related to the film, so we have the Lego Hobbit, and that is related to the films that Peter Jackson did, but it was translated into Lego and as a video game. So we're going to be looking at that one, and that one I've done a full review of. We're also looking at the Hobbit video game from 2003, which was unrelated to the movies. We also have a couple of different graphical adaptations here. The Hobbit graphic novel, this is a 1989 graphic novel that was done. And we also have the Hobbit pop-up book. This is what always sits behind me right here, the Hobbit pop-up book. I've done a full review of it and also of the graphic novel. So we've got those. And then we also have an audio recording, and this is BBC's radio theater production of The Hobbit. It's all done with a full cast radio theater. It's not an audio book. Now I do have kind of a standard 5 ranking chart here going from S tier to D tier, but I've given each of these tiers a Tolkien name. So for S tier we have Silmaril. Silmaril would be basically perfect things. The Silmarils are perfection. If you haven't been following along with my Silmarillion Summarized series, I would really encourage you to do that so you can learn more about the Silmarils. But the Silmaril would accurately reflect The Hobbit. That would be the best level of adaptation. Then we have the Arkenstone level of adaptation, the A tier. And the Arkenstone is really like Silmaril Jr., and so it is basically really, really good, but not completely and totally perfect. Then we drop down to the Barrow Blade adaptation level. Barrow Blades are really good and serviceable tools for the Hobbits. They're very strong. Maybe they're not the absolute best. Most of the Barrow Blades break at some point, and we would be looking here for adaptations that are pretty good, but they break at some point. Then we fall down into kind of the not so good tiers. First we have Cram. Cram is the hardtack of the Lakemen in The Hobbit, and Cram is serviceable. It's useful, but it's not good. Nobody enjoys it. So that's kind of the Cram level. It's a serviceable adaptation, but people don't really enjoy it. It's not very good. And then dropping all the way down, we have the Desolation tier, the D tier, and this is basically just useless. Desolation is what happens around Tolkien's really bad characters. In The Hobbit, there's the desolation of Smaug, and so these would be adaptations that are just bad and not serviceable or useful to anyone. So let's see what we get. First up, we've got the Rankin-Bass Hobbit. So this is the cartoon done in 1977 by Rankin-Bass, and this was, full disclosure, my first introduction to the world of Tolkien. I know I've mentioned that before, but this was what brought me into his world. Our library had a VHS copy of this, and I watched it I don't even know how many times. And so my view on this may be a little bit biased, but as far as Tolkien adaptations go, it's actually really quite accurate, even though it was done without the sanction of the Tolkien estate, even though they basically could have done whatever they wanted, it's actually pretty dang accurate to the story. There's a few things that are cut out of it, but it's really close in most of the terms of the story. I'd say there's 2 big things that are cut out. There's the entire story of Beorn, and there's the entire story of the Arkenstone. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in a Barrow Blade tier. It's very serviceable, but it breaks down at some point. Next, let's look at Peter Jackson's version of The Hobbit. Now, this version of The Hobbit is much maligned, and partially that's because Peter Jackson's version of The Lord of the Rings was so good, and people wanted that in The Hobbit, and it just didn't get delivered on. There are some good points to this trilogy. Some of the casting was right on point, but the story really broke down. So I'm going to have to put this one in the Cram territory. It's not desolation, it's not useless, But besides some redeeming points along the way, it's actually not very good. It's serviceable, but nobody really likes it. Next up, let's take a look at the video game ones. Okay, so we are going to go and do the Lego Hobbit because it's related to the one that we just saw in Peter Jackson's trilogy. And this one, unfortunately, if you've watched my full review, you're going to know that it never got finished. It got released, but not finished. So the story doesn't even end. So it suffers from a lot of the difficulties of Peter Jackson's trilogy. Some of the redeeming qualities of it are the Lego humor moments, but it's just not a good adaptation of The Hobbit at all. So unfortunately, this one's going in the desolation tier. Also in the video game territory, and I know that there is a really old text-based video game that people really liked from the 80s. I haven't been able to find that and play it, so I can't rank that one. But this 2003 version of The Hobbit, I played when it came out and recently been playing through it with my daughter. And this adaptation actually is really, really solid, especially when you consider the medium that it's going into. It keeps basically all the parts of the story intact. It adds in things in order to fill it out as a video game. So there are some things that are just way long extended from what happens in The Hobbit, especially like down in the mines of the goblins. That really is a very extended sequence that Bilbo kind of goes through before he ever even meets Gollum. But the story itself remains intact. They've just expanded on things in order to make it a video game. So there's a lot more enemies than there are in the actual story of The Hobbit. But it's all really quite well done. And so I'm going to bump this up into the Arkenstone tier. I really think they did a solid job capturing The Hobbit. There's a few places that they diverge. It's not a perfect reflection, but it's really, really good. Now, going into the book adaptations here, we have the graphic novel of The Hobbit. And again, this is a translation into a different medium, but it's still within a book. And I really like this adaptation quite a bit. I had a couple of qualms in my review if you go back and watch it, but nothing major. It really basically does the whole thing. So I think this one's got to go up on top. This is the Cimmerillion version of The Hobbit, probably, when you're talking about adaptation. Now, it has the advantage of still being a book, so there's not as much adaptation that has to be done, but there are a lot of graphics that had to be produced for this, and they did a really good job with it. They kept everything together, they didn't depart from the story, and they were able to translate it well into a new medium. Then we have the Hobbit pop-up book. Now, this book, you may have seen my full review of it. It is kind of a collector's item. I really lucked out in being able to even get a copy of it, but it only has about 5 scenes in it, so it just can't encompass the whole story. A pop-up book that encompassed the whole story would have to be like this thick. So it's not that, it's not the complete story, but as a pop-up book, it's really good. They contain quite a bit of the story, putting in actual chunks of passages of the story, but it just doesn't flow super well. You need to already kind of know the story or have someone there who can explain to you the gaps in between. So when I read this with my daughters, I'm able to fill in the gaps in between for them of what's happening in between each of the scenes. But the pop-up work is really well done. It's not the most amazing pop-up work that's out there, but it's well done pop-up work. The art is from John Howe, so it is excellent Tolkien art, and it really is good. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up here with the Rankin Bass Hobbit in the Barrel Blade tier. It doesn't contain as much as the Rankin Bass Hobbit, so it's hard for me to know which one of those should go forward. But we'll kind of leave it there for now. One of the things I didn't mention about Rankin Bass Hobbit, but one of the things that it has going for it is that it contains a lot of the music. Now, people vary on how much they like the Rankin Bass music quite a bit, but the fact is it does contain a lot of music, and that is part of Tolkien's world that doesn't always get translated into some of these adaptations. So I'm leaning towards leaving the Rankin Bass Hobbit above the pop-up book Hobbit. Then we come to the BBC audio production. Like I said, this is a radio theater. It's full cast, so there's different people playing the characters. It really is interesting, and I'll probably do a full review of it sometime, but they basically hit on everything in a very short period of time. It's only 4 hours long, and so they're covering it really quite quickly, more than twice as quickly as the actual audiobooks cover it. They do a couple of weird things, like they have a narrator, like The Hobbit does, but then they also have Bilbo as a character acting as a narrator too, and the narrator and Bilbo like have kind of a little bit of back and forth sometimes. So that's kind of interesting, kind of weird. There's a few places where they just kind of make changes for no reason, but those are pretty few and far between. But to me, they didn't feel necessary for the adaptation they were doing, getting it into a radio theater form. So for this one, I think it's going to go into the Barrel Blade. It's definitely good. It's serviceable. It doesn't deserve to be cram, but it's not going to reach up to that like Arkenstone level. But I do think it's probably going to go at the front of the Barrel Blade tier because it has the most accurate things. It doesn't leave anything out the way the Rankin Bass Hobbit doesn't, the way obviously the pop-up book needs to. So this is my final tier, I think, here. At the top, at the Cimarron level, is the Hobbit graphic novel. That one's really good. And then we have the Hobbit 2003 video game, really a stellar version of a video game adaptation of Tolkien's work. Then we have The Hobbit, the BBC radio production. Then we have the Rankin Bass cartoon Hobbit, and then we have the Hobbit pop-up book, all at the B Barrow Blade level. Then as we get down into the not so good ones, we have the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, and this could go either way, whether it's the theatrical or extended editions. Either way, they're just not very good. And then we have at the Desolation level, the Lego Hobbit video game. And it hurts me to put it there because I love Lego video games, and I love The Hobbit. And so it hurts me that this one isn't really very good. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. Now I want to hear from you. Go ahead and drop down in the comments. Let me know what you think of my rankings, what you would change, and if there's any other versions of The Hobbit that you would put on here. That's it for today. Until next time, farewell wherever you fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.